the efforts at the OSGi Alliance, everything that happens. We're an all-volunteer army, and our members are really the ones who get out the specifications that you see, and the ones that underlie or many of the Eclipse projects that you've been hearing about at this conference. As the president, please feel free to contact me. We have many other people from the OSGi Alliance here, and we'll be glad to answer any questions we can. With that, I'd like to welcome our speaker, Robert Montiano. Pretty close. He'll correct it. He's going to be speaking on Apache Sling, which is a content repository that's based on OSGi and with a REST interface, and I want to welcome him.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for the introduction. Thanks, everyone, for being here. I'd like to start by us getting to know a bit about each other. So I work with Adobe in Romania. I work on one of the content management products by Adobe, which has lots of roots in open source. So we make a lot of use of OSGi through Apache Felix, and I happen to be a contributor in those areas as well. Since this is EclipseCon, I would like to add that I do write Eclipse plugins as well, mostly oriented towards developer products, and some other developer-oriented tools as well. That would be me. I'd like to find out a bit about you as well. I would guess that most of the people here are familiar with OSGi, but by show of hands, okay, yeah, okay, good guess. How many of you are, let's say, a bit familiar with NoSQL databases, Mongo, Couchbase, Redis, all that stuff? Okay, so I'll do a little bit of discussion as we go through the presentation. Now, what are we going to talk about today? I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to Apache Sling so that we have sort of a common understanding of how this goes on. We're going to meet Barry, which is a special surprise in this presentation. We're going to have a demo and see how Apache Sling is fit to be this API gateway for NoSQL data stores. And then we're going to come to a conclusion that it is a good API gateway for your data stores, and the final wrap-up section. Now, a bit about Sling. We're obviously an Apache project. This is 2015, we had our release number 8. We've been with Apache since 2009 as a top-level project, and 2 years ago we entered, 2 years before that rather, we entered the incubator. So about a 10-year mark in terms of age maturity. We're a Java project, obviously, since we're based on OSGi. I think we do a lot of Maven, POM XML files. That's 9%, a bit much, but yeah, anyway. And about 600,000 lines of code. It was visible on the other graph as well, but we have a rather increasing and stable contributor base. This is what I like to call the lucky screenshot. I took it, I think, a month ago. This shows the activity, the number of commits per day in Apache project using Subversion, and we're over here. I think this was extremely lucky, but for one more year, I will not visit that page again because it might give me a different result. So I just like to use it for my slides. So, okay, now that was what Sling is, let's say from a bird's eye view, but what makes it interesting? So we say we have 5 main pillars of Apache Sling, 5 things which makes us interesting. One is obviously we're based on OSGi. We are RESTful. We are content-driven, we like to say. We have lots of scripting stuff, and we're an Apache project. Now, I'm going to talk about 2 of these. The fact that we're an Apache project, I'm not going to try to convince you that it's good to use open source projects from high quality for just like Eclipse or Apache. Content-driven and scripting inside are very important, but there's no time to talk about that. So REST-based and OSGi powered. OSGi powered, you will see how we use OSGi a bit along the way, but I'd like to start by telling you why we are REST-based and what is so cool about the way we do REST. Let's consider for a moment blog application. So you have these blogs, you have your data somewhere, and you would like to expose them to your users. So what you would typically do in a web development framework is have some URL mappings. So let me jump over here. If you go to the root, you would have some sort of home controller, which does the redirect, and then for /content/blog, have a blog list controller, and then you would have some sort of placeholder URL, so you have nice URL mappings which go to the blog list controller. And I would like to argue that this is not necessarily a good foundation for RESTful design. I mean, these days, when someone says they're doing REST, they probably say we are doing some sort of JSON output over HTTP, and we're using various verbs, and probably we're doing some sort of hierarchical URLs. But I'd like to argue that that's not the essence of REST. The essence of REST is that you have that all important resources can be identified by the name in a consistent manner. And how we do that with Sling is that we have this repository abstraction. So to start off, Sling, well, forces you is not a good word, allows you to store your resources in a hierarchical manner. So you have this content tree, always starts at the root, and all resources are placed in a hierarchical manner under it. Resources are just pieces of data. They have properties, names, properties, maybe a parent, maybe children. And by doing that, you have already designed your URL space. You have already arranged your resources in a way which is extremely easy to expose using HTTP because, well, when you call them, all you do is append.json or .html, and there's your URL mapping. So once you have your repository set up, you need somehow to serve it. And Sling offers you some built-in renderers for JSON, HTML, XML that you can use out of the box. And many systems use the JSON and XML renderers out of the box because they're pretty flexible. But for HTML, you probably need something different. I mean, you can't render your home page and your blog page using the same script. That would be madness. I can imagine JSP scripts with like a huge if statement for each resource. That's just not going to work. So Sling has a special property called the resource type. So a blog page has this resource type, a welcome page has this resource type. And we have, for instance, these are redirects because you want your entry point to be this content blog page. Okay, so now that we have the foundation set up, it's time to meet our special friend. I'd like you to meet Barry. Now, Barry, before I start, he's not an actual person. He's sort of imaginary, and any resemblance to technical architects, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Now, Barry here has two main, let's not call them qualities, attributes. Now, first of all, he is Buzzword driven. He knows all about the latest NoSQL frameworks and JavaScript front-end libraries, Hacker News, all that stuff, which is good. I mean, you have to keep yourself informed. Now, second of all, he has a very short attention span, which, okay, maybe not so good when you have all that information. Now, he happens to be a coworker of mine at Acme Corporation, and he's sort of a technical architect for the blog I'm working on. Now, okay, just my good luck. Now, Barry went on vacation, so I took the opportunity to rewrite the blog using Apache Sling because it's such a cool framework that I told you about. Obviously, he came back and he had a little, let's say, he wasn't so happy. Now, he said, okay, that's not going to work. We can't do this with your technologies. We would need to use Couchbase because Couchbase is such a great technology. I said, well, Barry, I agree. I'm going to do the persistence using Couchbase. Sling allows me to do that. The next morning, he became concerned that we're going to have, he said, a humongous number of comments, so they should be stored in Mongo. Mongo it is. Then he had another concern that said, well, we're not serving our assets fast enough. Let's do them in the file system. I said, okay, we'll map everything to the file system, that's fine. And when he came the next morning, I gave him a laser pointer, you know, he still chases that around, so I got him off my back, which was good. But okay, now I have this system on my hands, and I'd like to go to a demo and show you how Apache Sling allows you to map all of these data sources in a consistent way. So let's switch to, no, that's not visible. Some drag and drop should fix it, but it makes it funnier. Okay, so this is just a regular blog page. It has a couple of blog posts. If you go here, you can see the full details. You have some comments. Now, if I add a comment, let's see how this goes. Live from Eclipse Con. Typing without seeing. Anyway, so if I save, it's added. Now, as you can see, that's a pretty regular blog entry, right? Nothing spectacular. Except the fact that you have 3 different persistence stores which all come together and and bring the data in front of you. But okay, you can do this probably with any development framework. You can do this without any development framework. You can use a servlet and just bring your resources forward. Now, let's take a bit of a look under the hood and see how Apache Sling structures that data by looking at the JSON output. Okay, so I need to drag this as well. Now, why I go for the JSON output is that most of the times you're not that much interested in seeing HTML when you're doing sort of an API gateway, but you want to see JSON. So is that visible? Can you read that fine? Okay, let's try a thicker font.
Maybe the color.
Okay, the color. Let me.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
White on black. Is that better?
Black letters on a white background might be better.
Let's do that as well. Do I have that?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now, so I'm going to access the exact same resource that I showed in the demo. Now I'm going to take the JSON output, and this little 5 that you see here is just asking Sling to show me nested information, all the children up to 5 levels deep. So, well, there's a lot. Let's take it from the top. I scrolled less on a smaller screen. So you can see here we have the comments and the post name, and then we have each of the comments listed, comment, and the images. Now, I want to call that out because when I said static resources are going to come from the file system, well, they're being served from the file system through Sling. So Sling also has an abstraction for mapping the file system to it, which works great if you want to treat everything in a uniform manner. Of course, you can do static file deployment that's one step above if you're using Sling. And then finally, these are the blog posts, obviously blocks of text. Now, how would this, okay, so we have these things. Let's take a quick look and see how this looks in each of the data stores. Now, Couchbase, paste. Did I manage to paste? There you go. So Couchbase, I dumped all of the data from Couchbase. You have these Couchbase identifiers, the value object, which actually holds the data for Sling, and these are just some helpers so that we know the path and the parent path. So everything is here in Couchbase. You can see the same titles. And if I go to Mongo, then I would see the exact same data. So this is live from Eclipse Con. This is the same ID, and you have the same data object. And here we use the Mongo native identifier. And The file system is pretty simple. I'm not going to show you that. It's just the same stuff. So getting back to the presentation. So just to help visualize, this is our sort of repository tree. We have something at the root, which is a Java content repository provider. I will get back to that a bit later. And we have in the tree, we have various mounts, various places where other persistent providers are, let's say, injected. If you use a Unix or Unix-like operating system, it's very similar to the concept of mounts that we have there. So switching a bit to the OSGi part, how does Sling manage that? What are the abstractions that we use? So this is sort of the SPI, like the service provider interface. What do I do if I want to have sort of an external resource brought into Sling? Well, there's a very simple resource provider interface that you need to implement. At a minimal, you have two operations to implement: a list and a get, and list children and get resource for a path. In turn, these are produced by a factory. Surprise, surprise. The factory is an OSGi component, which gets registered to the service registry, and then it gets used by others. Now, we have a number of resource providers. You saw the file system ones, a couple of the NoSQL ones, and the JCR one. Now, the resource resolver is what people actually use. If you're a Java programmer working with OSGi, the resource resolver uses the provider factories and builds a consistent view of the repository for clients. And this is sort of how you do CRUD, how you do create, read, update, delete with Sling. So you have on top sort of get resource, get children, and find resources. And then create, delete, update. If you want to do update, you update the resource straight away. What's interesting here, and I want to discuss it a little, is that you don't see any IDs here. You don't see any UUIDs or string numerical IDs, because in Sling, everything is path-based. So the unique identifier of a resource is the path at which it's located in the repository. And that's what you would use to access your resources probably 19% of the time. You still have queries, but that's sort of for administrative tasks. And if you think about it, if you want to find the blog post with ID 83 right in a relational database, actually in Sling, you don't want to run a query for an ID. You want to say, hey, get me the resource that's the first at /content blog something. If you want to get the first 10 blog posts, you don't select from blog posts where ID between blah, blah, limit offset as in MySQL. You said, hey, get me the children of /blog and just get the first 10 children. That's the way you would actually do it in Sling. Okay, so let's follow a bit through a GET request, an HTTP request, and see how do we get to writing some code in Sling. So that's a GET request fired off from a client, asks for JSON. The bolded out part is the actual resource that we're going to serve. Now, I mentioned that different resources have different resource types, so we need to resolve them somehow. We have something called the resource resolver, which finds out exactly what we're looking for. Then we try to resolve the servlet or script, which is going to handle that request. And finally, our own servlet, which is not the standard HTTP servlet, but the custom one is going to be invoked. Finally, time to look at the code. Long way, but once we get here, it's pretty simple. So, okay, bold doesn't really show. We have this request get resource call. It's already done for us. ACL checks have been done. We know that the resource exists. We don't have to do a lot of work. And then we get its properties using a value map. A value map is simply a hash map on steroids with some additional methods like getting defaults. Sometimes you're fine using such an untyped way of accessing data. You can just do hash maps and be fine with it. Sometimes you want sort of a strongly typed approach. And that's where Sling helps you with this resource adapt to post.class. Now, post.class, the post class is something outside of Sling's domain. It's a custom class that we have written. And we do so by using the Sling adaptable abstraction. What that means is that you can transform resources which are completely unrelated to each other from a type point of view by registering adapter factories. These are OSGi components. If you're working with Eclipse, you probably know this from the iAdaptable interface. It's more or less the same concept. You can transform a resource by registering an adapter factory in OSGi, which says, hey, I can transform from resource to posts. And therefore, you have this switch between completely unrelated domains. Writing is more or less the same stuff. You get a value map and you put to it, or you use your own adaptable. Just remember to commit at the end. And the good news is that the batteries on my laser pointer that I gave to Barry have run out. And now he wants to know how many people are actually visiting our site. So I said, OK, Barry, no. Let me tell you about Redis. Redis is the thing you need to do to use your stats. Now, incidentally, Redis is very good at doing that. It has some primitives which allow you to count and rank stuff. So let's do a little Redis. I'm going to try and be a little bit brave here and do this live. So here's my mouse. It's since we are going to register an OSGi component, I already deployed that. I'm going to register a new one. This is the place where it's going to appear. This is my Redis host. Nothing too spectacular here. And now if I go back to the home page and refresh, waiting long is never good. It didn't work. Good. Now the point here was that little box was supposed to. I know why. I think I didn't add my data. Give me just a second. No. Anyway, a little box was supposed to appear here, and I would have shown you that we have these ranked resources come from Redis. Now, I'm going to show you how simple it is to write something that you didn't actually see work. But anyway, OK, now this font, I think, is a bit too big. But anyway, we have our resource provider factory, which is really simplistic. This is more or less annotation boilerplate for an OSGi component. The activate method connects to Redis, and then our builder creates a resource provider. Now, this is where a lot of work is being done. Not really a lot of work. Here is where we connect to Redis. And we simply do a little Redis call, get some data, and build it into a resource. The resource doesn't really do much. These entries are the data which comes back straight from Redis, just some getters. And then when you try to get a value map out of it, it returns those entries. So that's it to creating an adapter factory for something like Redis. OK, back from the successful demo. I sometimes like to visualize the repository as a tree. It's easy to do that. But there are many things which I did not cover. There's a lot more to Sling than mapping data stores over HTTP. Now, that's just a laundry list, partial laundry list of the things we do in Sling. I'm not going to read through them. The point is that we do have lots of features which help for application development, RESTful application development, web application development. It's very extensible because it uses OSGi internally a lot. And that. So, and I've been sort of tiptoeing around the issue that there's this GCR thing that Apache Sling uses. And OK, what about it? Why did I talk about that? Well, Sling was built at a time when there were no NoSQL databases as we talk about them today. So it's a good question. What did we build it for? We obviously didn't build it for Couchbase or Mongo. And the answer is JCR. JCR is a standard. There are a couple of JSRs for it. It's a content repository API for Java, built for content-driven applications, content management systems as an example. And it's, surprisingly, it's hierarchical, just like Sling expects it to be. It works with the resources abstraction. And besides what we saw here, it has lots of stuff built into it, like versioning built in, ACLs, and user authentication built into the application. You can do queries, locking, transactions, and much, much more. So the point is, if you think that Sling with NoSQL is something which is interesting to you, you would love to work with Sling and Apache O. They make a really good fit together. Okay, so we have now to do a little checklist. Did we show that Sling is a good fit for our use case or not? So RESTful, I think we've shown how Sling allows you to access resources over HTTP in a consistent manner. API Gateway, we saw the Sling JSON output. There's also the XML output, and obviously you can plug in your own. So I think that's a good fit here as well. NoSQL, we saw almost 3, I guess 2 NoSQL data stores, but we'll still cover it here. OSGi, we're definitely built on top of OSGi. We saw some of that in the demos, so we got that covered too. I hope to have convinced you at the end of the presentation to take a look at Apache Sling for your next, or maybe even for your current project. These are some resources that you can use as starting points if you want to find out more about Sling and how we do this NoSQL mapping. And I am ready to take questions now.
We have about 7 minutes, so we can take quite a few questions. Any questions for Robert?
Yes?
Querying it would be quite interesting, I guess. How would you retrieve, for example, the blog post with the highest average word count in the comments?
Sorry, how would I retrieve the comments? Sorry?
You have a blog post with a couple of comments.
Yes.
And now we want the one with the longest comments.
Well, there are many ways of approaching that. One would be to have a special resource provider, which simply answers to content blogs / longest post, and you do that internally, whatever you want. The second would be to have your resource provider be able to answer to queries. So you would write a query in Mongo or whatever you want to, which would get the longest comment, and then you get the path for its blog post. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
This scheduling thing, I would like to know, is there because I've been trying to find out how it really works, is there a place that can be gone to see how it, or just an implementation somewhere, or just an example, book, whatever, of the Apache Sling scheduling, how the scheduling works?
Yeah.
The question is there documentation to learn more about Sling?
So if you want to start off, I guess the simplest way is to use our Docker. To use Docker, you can pull it from the official Docker hub. And then the sling.apache.org has documentation, including for our job system. You might not find it under scheduling, but under jobs or events.
I found this there.
Okay.
I'm just saying, if there was somewhere that this was done, that we can see how it worked, or something like that.
We can look together through the samples after the, so yeah. We have a number of samples.
There are samples on the Apache side?
There are samples in the SVN repository, quite a number of them. So,
Other questions for Robert? Any more questions? Well then, thank you again, Robert.
thank you.